More people come in. Oh dear, what have I done here? Okay. Nice work, Anna. Delivering and now listening. Okay, everyone see my screen okay? Hear me? Super.
Yep.
YouTube is on, so let's get this show on the road. As usual, for those who've attended these events before, which is many of you I can see in the participant list, but there may be some newbies. Just going to go through a quick kind of intro as to what to expect from like our events and kind of upcoming events. Won't take long. Then I'll hand over to Adam, our presenter today, to introduce himself and, more importantly, the Excel stuff, which we're all here for. So, rocking on with that stuff, diving straight in, upcoming events. So, mixing up the in-person and the virtuals, you know, some of us were just talking about that before we went live on YouTube, and for those who are in the room, trying to do one of each, always a little bit of a battle. So you can see we do have an online one scheduled for next month. So for those calling in from the international audience, there is one on the Tuesday, 16th of May, where we have Alex, who is a data viz expert. So he'll be here to talk about designing dashboards to survive in the corporate world. He's going to do what he's labelled a cemetery walk, but I couldn't fit all that stuff in the title, so I shortened it. But that is happening on live, so all, I guess, more of a theory-based session. Like, I guess there will be some technical things, but it's more about, you know, the designing of dashboards to work as opposed to like how to do it, kind of thing. So that should be good. He's an expert in the area. He recently ran the Data to Speak competition, which I was involved in as like a kind of jury member to assess stuff. So yeah, that should be good. For the in-person stuff, for those who can do the ones in London, we've got kind of 3 booked, which you can see on screen. I mean, the one on the end, I don't know if the venue as such yet. I guess it's kind of semi-booked. But the first 2 are ready to go. We've got Paul Martin coming in just a couple of weeks from now, doing some enterprise kind of Power BI stuff with Excel. And we've got Chris Webb. He's coming back. You know, he presented in person a couple of years ago at our older venue. He's back again. Topic yet to be decided. Pretty confident it's going to be Power Query based. And that will be live and in person only on the 9th of May. John Peltier is coming from across the pond. He will be here early August and he's ready to present, working on the venue. Our venue is moving, so that's not confirmed until we hear what's going on with Red Kite, and you know, moving is always fun, isn't it? So just to get that over the line first, but that is pretty much there. Once again, topic not yet decided, but for those of you who are familiar with John, which is probably the majority of you, it will be to do with charts in some manner. That manner yet to be decided. Cool, that should be Tuesday the 2nd. So obviously if you're based in London or the UK, that's pretty easy to get around the UK, generally speaking. Put it in your diary, come see us, learn some Excel, have a drink, meet John, meet me, meet Taya, maybe. And other people who, some of you are in this call. Things to note for this, usual stuff for those who hear it every time, new for those who do not. We will do a follow-up email. So this session's all recorded, it's live on YouTube now, it's recorded on that same link on YouTube, and that link is in the events page. So you already have it. You know, so if you miss anything that Adam says, or you want to watch it back and follow it, that will be provided after the session and it's available now. So give YouTube a moment to kind of render that, or whatever the correct term is, when this is done. Like give them 60 minutes or so, and you can watch that straight back if you want to watch it twice this evening or today for some of you. What else to say? Follow-up email, yeah, we'll have that link. We'll share the files provided by Adam, yeah, information about upcoming events, just typical kind of follow-up especially for those who RSVP but may miss this. You only get the follow-up email if you have RSVP'd to this session. So if you want it, make sure you RSVP. And that is pretty much done, I guess. I see Taya shared the recording link in the chat. She's also shared a file that Adam's funny shared with us. That will come in a few more times because people are coming and going. So you'll see that a few more times. Click that link, download that file, and you'll have what Adam's going to have or does have. On that note, let me stop my waffle and hand on to the exciting stuff, which is Adam and PowerPivot. You ready to rock, Adam?
Okay, so I can share my screen now, yes?
For sure, yeah.
Okay. So
Cool.
the file was sent 2 times. Okay, and one fast check. You should see my Excel file.
We do indeed. Cheers, Adam.
Thanks. So I can start, yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay. So first of all, a few words about me. I'm Adam Kopeć, Excel lover from Poland, and I'm a Microsoft MVP since 2017. I have some courses and books in Polish, and most of all, I have YouTube channel. And since the end of 2022, I also have a YouTube channel in English, and one of my books, Excel Superhero, was translated to English, and there it is right now on Amazon. And this is unusual book because it's written as a dialogue. So if Alan say I can, so in the file you can go to this link and you can sign up for 3 chapters for free to see if this unusual way of talking about Excel is for you. And I think so you will be sent to this page and you can sign up. And today we're gonna talk about PowerPivot and KPIs in PowerPivot. It will be some introduction to PowerPivot add-in. And the first thing we should know about PowerPivot, it's not in all Office version. For Excel 2010, we can download additional add-in, and in versions 2013 and 16, there are the biggest problems with PowerPivot because PowerPivot isn't in all Office version, and the second link show us in which version PowerPivot should be in. But in many cases, PowerPivot is not included. And the easiest way to check if PowerPivot is on our Excel version is to go to File tab and then to go to Options. Then we can go to Add-ins tab, and at the bottom we can see Manage drop-down list, and we can see add-ins, common add-ins, not Excel add-ins, common add-ins, and then press go. And when we have here something like Microsoft PowerPivot for Excel, we can check it and press OK. And then PowerPivot tab should appear at the end of our all tabs. I don't think for Mac. I don't have Mac, and I don't think PowerPivot is available, especially because Microsoft don't like Apple or Mac, and there are some connections at the beginning, but now they don't like each other very much. And okay, so I prefer to answer questions during our meeting. So I have the second monitor on which I can see your question on Zoom. So I will sometimes look at my left side and I can see your questions. If you have some, you can ask them on our chat. Yeah, I definitely prefer chat. And then when I see him, I could answer right from the beginning. And if I mispronounce something or go too fast, something missing, you can ask me to repeat, to say it in another words, especially that I am from Poland and English is my second language. So, okay, so I hope you all have PowerPivot in your Excels and you can create, do most of the things we will be doing today with me. So that's why the file was sent, the link to file was sent a few times so far. Okay, we are starting with data on the percent costs tab. And this data set is a table. It's an Excel table. We can see by selecting one cell, we see table design tab, or depending on Office version, it may differ, but it should be the last, even after PowerPivot. So just one cell, we have C, this is table design tab. So our data set is a table and it's important for PowerPivot, and our table is called Tabela 1. And if our data set isn't a table, so I just copy pasting some data and we try to import data to PowerPivot. So I have to go to PowerPivot tab. We have just few commands here and we should use add to data model. So add to PowerPivot. And when we try with data that isn't table, PowerPivot will ask us to change it to data power table, Excel table. Okay, but we have already created a table, so we can just select one cell in this data set and go to PowerPivot add to data model command, and PowerPivot editor should appear when we can see our data set. And I want to try to move some things in on my monitor so I can see. Yes, just like that. The most important things for us today. And our table was imported to PowerPivot. We can see the table name in left bottom corner, and we see it's called Tabela 1. And for a second, we should see also a message that the data model have changed and we should go to workbook to let's say refresh data. But it's just to connect between Excel and PowerPivot information between those. Yes, it's most cases it's better to import data with PowerPivot, but we have a limited time, and the simplest solution is just to import table from Excel to PowerPivot. And so let's go to PowerPivot, and once the big difference, I prefer PowerPivot editor, that Power Query editor, is that we can easily manage between jump from Excel and PowerPivot editor. We can even open a few PowerPivot editor for different files. Yeah, it's better. And if already this question was asked, we have get external data commands on Home tab in PowerPivot. I first learned Power Query, and I try once or twice using those options. I'm not using them anymore. I prefer PowerPivot, or at least add to data model from Excel. For simple solution, this importing from Excel is enough, and we have just some simple examples, and will be enough for us. Okay, so I'm once again in PowerPivot editor, and because my current table name is tabela 1, so it's even a table from Poland. So I want to change this name. So I will just double click it and write T costs and with uppercase T costs, just like that. I prefer to call my tables starting with small t and then the name of the table that tells me what is inside. It should be just enough so the user, know what's inside this table, and I prefer shorter version of tables. And it's important that even if we change the name of the table in PowerPivot, the connection between Excel and PowerPivot stays. So if I change here the value in the first row of data to 500 and go to PowerPivot, and now I refresh my data, so in few seconds, even faster than usually for me, the first row changed. The value in first row in cost column changed. You should see the 500. And once again, my data model changed. And we should select workbook to close this message and to PowerPivot be happy. Okay, so one thing in here is about columns formatting. Let's say the values in columns. In most cases, it's have minimal importance for us, but I really don't like when I see my date with time if I have just date. So I go to Home tab and you can see formatting, and I will choose just this second one, just to see short date without any additional time information, and that's enough for us. And the other information, the columns we won't change today. So formatting home, and now we can go on Home tab, and there are some commands that will be important when working with PowerPivot. Those are especially those 4 commands on the right side of our window on our tab. And the first, show data view. So we now see our data. So we see tables. Then we have diagram view. When we click this command, the view changes. So we are not in data view right now. We are in diagram view, where we see just tables name and columns. And this view is to manage relation between tables, because we will be working only with one table at the time today. This view isn't important for us today, but in most cases, it's very important managing relation between tables, and this is also power of PowerPivot, because we can connect between many tables, and therefore can create really impactful PowerPivot tables. And we can also show hidden show hidden columns. Let's I will show you. Just right click column name and column header, and from pop-up menu we can see hide from client tools. It's especially from hiding from PowerPivot, from pivot tables. So I can hide this column, and we can see that this column is gray out. And when this command is highlighted, we can see those columns. But when it's not, so when we just one more time click it, we won't see this column. And in most cases, we want to see all the data in PowerPivot, but sometimes we don't want to see too many columns in Excel in pivot tables. So I will just show hidden information, and once again right click country column, and this time I will unhide from client column. So it's not gray out anymore, and we can see all columns in this table. And the last command option is very important for us today, calculation area. And when it's not highlighted, we won't see empty cells beneath table, but we need those empty cells because we will create measures. Measures are created just right here, and we need measures to create then KPIs in Excel. And for now, we can create our first simple measure. So just select one cell in our calculation area, and because it doesn't really matter which cell we select, but when I'm creating measures here, I prefer to be below the most important column that is connected to the calculation are connected to measure I will create. Yeah. Okay. So now we can. So I have selected cell, and I can go to formula bar, and I can create measure just by writing her name first. So for now, I write percentage and costs. Cost, let's say that like this, and colon equal sign. So let's zoom it, and I can also zoom it, make it bigger, but it will work. It will. Why don't go so much too small zoom to be bigger? Okay, so I don't can do it like this. So we have this. So first the name, then we have the signs that just is on the left side of those signs. We have name, then we have our standard equal sign and also colon, and then we are writing formula. And the simplest function in DAX in PowerPivot are the same like in Excel. So for example, sum function, but in most cases, in most function, PowerPivot works with whole columns. So we are creating sum over cost column, and we can write here cost, and PowerPivot will show us only data that correspond to this name, that contains this text we written. And because we are creating measures, I prefer to add full column name. So table name, and then let's use green, column name. So I will choose the second option, press tab to put everything in my formula and closing parentheses. And now I can press enter, and PowerPivot we create our first measure, and we can see that also result of this measure. And just like I said before, it's a sum of the whole column. It's the sum because we use sum function, and it's whole column because we don't have additional filters on our table that is in PowerPivot. But when we add filters, so let's say drop down list from country and just select Finland, our value it should change. I am not sure it's changed. We also start with a 4, so I wasn't sure, but it's changed. It's now only 40,000, no 400 something. So the value changed because, and it's the most important thing about measures, filters affects measures, and it's very important if our design of PowerPivot and the cells. So when we add one more filter, this time on a manager column, just one manager, one value. Choose the value, change once again, because filters, I will say it again, filters affect measures, and position in Power Pivot tables affects measures, and it's really important. Okay, so let's clear all filters for now because we don't need this, and we want to add some format, number format to our measure, and we can go on Home tab and we can see formatting, number formatting, and just like we change formatting from our column, we can change formatting for our explicit measure, and we can go with pounds, let's say, and a currency formatting. I should have made it wider column to see the result, and we can see we have now pounds, we have currency. And it's important that when we use measure in Power Pivot tables, the default format, number format, will be the same as in here in our calculation area. So we can make our calculation, our creating reports, if we especially create many reports, faster. But my measure name tells me different story that function I use, because I just start with simple function, but in reality I want to calculate percent cost, so I should add some more calculation. So this time I should divide my sum of costs by the sum, so once again sum function. And for me it's easier to learn about Power Pivot because names in Power Pivot in Polish and English version are the same. So I use the same function in Power Pivot. In Excel, the names are different, but in Power Pivot are the same. So just sum function, and this time we are interested in income. And once again, I prefer use full column name. So first table name, then in square brackets column name, and our function, enter, and the value, the result of our function change because we change our formula. Yeah, so I don't hear something, or okay. So now I should change number format because now currency format for this measure doesn't have a sense. So just select this measure and pick percentage format, and we should see percentage with 2 decimal places. It should be enough for us, and this is, I think, everything we need before we create our first pivot table, Power Pivot table. Let me check my notes. Yeah, I think we are okay. It's just eventually go to Excel for a bit to hide messages, and now we can create pivot table. So because we just have one table in Power Pivot, and it's very simple data set, we can go on Home tab and click here pivot table, and we will create pivot table. I will say Power Pivot table because are some key differences between those tables. The default, the Excel pivot table and Power Pivot table. So we want to create our pivot table on the new sheet. So just press OK, and we can see our pivot table. And most of you should have our pivot table fields on the right, but I prefer them closer to my tables, Power Pivot tables. So I will drag it to the left a bit, and we can see first difference between pivot table, Power Pivot table window, and default Excel pivot tables. We have here two tabs, active and all. On all tab, we will see all tables from data model or from Excel worksheets that are in this workbook. And we are currently interested in T costs table, and I won't be able to zoom it, but when we hold mouse cursor over our T costs name table, we can see that it's important from Excel and from our table called Tabela 1. But it's just one thing. No, it's not possible to load data from PowerPivot to Excel. We can create PowerPivot tables based on the data in PowerPivot. Probably if you drag all fields to columns and rows, on rows, to rows, you will see but in case Mike write on chat, I will show you that the solution, because in most cases, and especially if I remember correctly, in case of PowerPivot, it won't show us the whole data. So it will work only if we have small data set. Okay, so let's make some changes in our pivot table, because we don't have any information in our pivot table. We should see last field as our measure, so percent cost. And we also should see, let's go with blue, FX symbol. That means this is measures. But the oldest version of PowerPivot don't have this option, so in some old version we won't see this FX. But from 2016 or at least from 2019, this FX sign should be, and based on that we can see that this field is our measure. And I want to drag manager to rows and the other way around. So managers to columns and country to rows. And I want to modify my pivot table. So I want to go to design, report layout as tabular form, and I want also grant totals on. So I want to see all information or our calculation. And now I can drag my measure to values, and for each cell, Excel calculate different result. As I said before, measures are affected by filters. So for example, when I have selected cell D6, so on this field works filter based on manager column, and we can see only costs for Moana, and also it works filter on country column, and we can only see costs for France. So two filters are on this column, and when we double click this information, Excel will extract for us table, but the first important information is at the first line. It will only extract 1000 rows. So in most cases, it's not enough. And we can double click the grant total. So it should show all data, but only 1000 rows. So for PowerPivot, we cannot export data from PowerPivot to Excel in meaningful way, only creating pivot tables and based on them create reports. Okay, so now we have our measure and our first pivot table, and we can go for a second to active tab. And now in active tab, we should see the costs table. Now, okay, and you should something similar to this. And now we finally can create KPIs based on our first measure. So select just one cell in this pivot table, go to PowerPivot tab and click KPIs command. And we want new KPI and can just click. And now, because we only create one measure, so in the first drop-down list, we have only one measure. So we have to choose it. Then we are choosing if we are working with absolute value or we are comparing our chosen measure to another measure. Our first example is based on absolute value. And KPI, I should say about few words about KPI. KPI means key performance indicator. So let's say it's a measure really important for us. And for us, percent cost is very important measure. And we want to check if our cost, our value here in PowerPivot are good, okay, or bad. So we want some visual. So we want some icons to see if those values are good, okay, or bad. Because when we see many numbers near each other, we won't clearly see if those values are good or bad. So we can write as our absolute value 20%. But unfortunately, PowerPivot doesn't understand this percentage as a number. So we have write it as a decimal number. So 0.2. And when I go somewhere else, it should understand me by changing our threshold. And we can see target here 20%, so 0.2. And first of all, in case of cost, the lower the cost, the better for us. So the colors we are using now are reverse. So we have to just click here to change the color orders. And I decide that 0.2, 20% is our target. It's marvelous if we achieve this goal, this target. But we know it's almost impossible. So we are writing 2 more thresholds. So for us, if we reach cost below 25%, it's good for us. And when we go with cost below 30%, it's our second threshold. It's bad if we go up. So our costs are larger than this numbers of 30%. And if we want to, we can drag our slider on the left or right side to show our threshold, even distributed on our slider, but it's not really important in case of final results. It's that so we can see that our target, so this value, is on the left side of our first threshold, and then we have this range. So yellow, it means okay. And if I've used yellow, it won't be, yeah. So let's use pink. Malina is here, so I can use pink. And we can see okay values, and with red, those are our bad values. And for now, those values, those ranges are just connect with simple icons, simple traffic lights, and the icons I like the most are the second set. Pink is the best, yeah. Marina likes pink, or I should say raspberry, I think. It's the favorite color of Marina. And my favorite set icons is the second one. We can even choose 5 icons, but only if you really have many thresholds. Yeah, for this. So once again, first we choose measure, then absolute value, then we select. So this is our target. Choose one threshold, second threshold, set icons, color set, and we can now press OK. So now we create our first KPI. And because based on our measure percent cost, we create KPI, we can see in pivot table fields traffic lights. Here we can see traffic lights, our measure, and we can see that under those traffic lights we see, let's make it wider, so we see a value, so our measure percent cost, we can see goal, so our target, and it's in most cases is useless information because it's repeating 0 to, in this case, so 20%, so it's useless for us right now. And we can see status, and the status is based on icons. We can see 0, 1, and -1, but those are still numbers. I want my icons, and in most cases we won't see icons at the start. We should uncheck status field and check it again, then Excel should show us icons so we can see our KPIs, our values. And because we have icons and I don't like white headers, I want to change this header to just KPI. So just select cell in pivot table and write KPI and enter. And in each header, connect to KPI to status field, the value will be changed. And let's say just double clicks to make it narrow. And the absolute value was 0.2. And it's one more thing, because we create KPI, but something went wrong. Sometimes it does. So we can go to PowerPivot tab, go to KPIs, and we can now manage KPIs. We now have some KPIs, so we can go to this KPI, select it, and edit. We don't want to delete. So percentage cost, you can see we use absolute value, and it's 0.2, and the point, so the dot or comma here depends on regional settings. For American English it should be dot, but for Poland it should be comma. But now I'm on English settings, so now I have here dot, and the difference should be seen in the position of our threshold, where they actually are. So we cannot write here percentages signs because PowerPivot don't understand, but we also have to check our regional settings. If dot is the sign that differs, so stands between whole parts, integer part, and decimal parts. Yeah. And now I've wrote here 0.25 and 0.3. And I just said before, this slider, what it's showing exactly where are our threshold doesn't really matter. The value in those threshold matters. But when we drag somewhere to the right, sometimes to the left, depending on the slide arrows, we can see it clearer now. Okay, so let's can write. Okay, and we can close because we editing our KPI. And for this example, it's almost over. I would like only to select my all icons and align them. I like my icons to be centered. And I like this more, but unfortunately, I don't know a way to make it automatically. And when we change our pivot table, in most cases, there are some errors and the alignment won't copy properly to all values because the values are different names and etc. So for pivot table, so if we want to have our aligned center, we should do it once again. And even if I copy once again, no, manager should be on top of values. And this way I prefer. So I want to costs be mere KPIs, not cost first and then KPIs. So manager should be on top of values. And you should have something similar to this. And it's the end of our first example. We create PowerPivot and KPI for it. And this is based on absolute value. Now we can go to the second data set, planned versus actual. So we want to check how good we are in planning our expenses. So we have to import this data set also to PowerPivot. And once again, this is Excel table. So just PowerPivot and add to data model. And now we can see two tables in PowerPivot, and we can just like in Excel sheets go between them. Okay, but now for us, this data set is important. On this, we will be working. And we want to create, based on this data set, two measures. And on Home tab, there is auto sum command. So we can create some simple measure just by choosing this option. And I want to create measure based on plan cost column and actual cost column. So just like before, I will select one cell beneath plan cost column, then go to Home tab, just click auto sum function and choose. For this example, we just want sum, so we don't even have to drop down, click on drop down list, just auto sum, and PowerPivot will create a measure for us. And this automatically created measure use just column names. And in most cases, it should work fine, especially with simple example as this. So we don't have to use the full column names. But when we refer measures, there won't be any table names. So let's write our measure. Its percent should work here. Costs, no, because I should start with square brackets. So when I'm using square brackets, and I have only one measure with this name. So in case of measures, we won't see any table names. So it's one way to differ between column names and measures when we're using table name, so full column name. Okay, I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but something is called, so good. It should be good. And I don't like long names, even if Power Query can manage them. I try to my names to be as short as possible to understand each measure, each column, and etc. And because we are working with small data set, short names should be enough. So first measure name is plant, and it's just sum of plant costs. Now, once again, this time under actual cost column, home tab, sum, and once again, name of our measure is too long, so just actual and column and equal sign and just sum. And we have our two measures, and we should change formatting. So I want current formatting. I want because we have too many zeros, too many decimal places. I don't need here any decimal places. So when I go to more formats here, I can go with 0 decimal places here, and the pounds are default version for me, for my regional settings, or I can even change if I want to look for different values, different currencies. And 0 decimal places, symbols, and also we have two now measures created. And I didn't pay attention when I was dragging. I think I didn't say it once again. When we drag first time our measure percent cost measure to pivot table, the default formatting was with percentages. So this time, because we create measure as a currency format, when we drag them to Excel and to PowerPivot tables, those measures should be with pounds. Yeah, it's a nice trick. And sometimes it can make calculation simpler, but it's with the simpler calculation, because they were only using simple calculation, and measures can be much more complicated using even calculate functions, all function filters. There are many nuances with DAX language and filter context. Okay, so we have created measures. Now we can create pivot table based on this data set, this table. So create pivot table, new worksheet, and this time we want to work with the factor event, because and we now see I can see 4 tables in all tab, because I double click PowerPivot cell and Excel create for me new table. So let's go this sheet. Now I can see 4 tables, but I need just the factory table. So, and I want to go factory first in rows and then departments in rows. And once again, I should change design of my PowerPivot, because I want report layout tabular and I want grand totals on. And now I can drag my 2 measures to values, so plant and actual. And we have nice table, PowerPivot table, and we have our measures as pounds. And in comparison, we can drag planned cost under the planned measure, and let's go to active cell now, and actual cost below actual measure. And just like that, we can see that the results are the same, the values for each column are the same, but our measure is properly calculated, properly formatted from the start. So we have pounds here, and here we don't have any pounds. And I want to here do one more thing with those sums. So not with measures, but with sums, we just by dragging field to values area. And I want just, let's say for planned cost, let's right click and show summarize value by count. And for actual cost, right click, drop down menu want to show me summarize value by and average to show the difference. And we can see we create something, but it's not important for us in this example. It's not important here, but I want to show you something with those values, but not in pivot table. So let's remove those values out of our pivot table now. And when our pivot table is created, we can for a bit go to PowerPivot editor and we create something. But what exactly we created when we drag field names to values area? And we can go to PowerPivot on Advanced tab and click here, Show Implicit Measures. So just right click, it's now highlighted, and now we should see more measures. And those measures are implicit measures, and the measures we created are called explicit measures, and are key difference between those measures. Let's drag it more wider to show all value. Oh, it doesn't really matter, but let's make it a bit wider. And the first difference, when we actually see implicit measures, they have in a cell those, let's say, rounded arrows. So this icon means an implicit measure. And implicit measures in most cases aren't good when we're working with PowerPivot, because we cannot change anything in implicit measures. So we cannot change name, we cannot change function we used, calculation we used, and the function we are using or PowerPivot is creating is based on a summarization option from PowerPivot. So measure, we cannot summarize values for explicit measures, and for implicit measures, just those summarization are our function we can use. So if we don't work with simple calculation, we shouldn't use implicit measures. So just press delete and delete those measures from data model. And I want to show you when I remember about icons, we can see our measure on T costs column now have also icons. It has traffic lights because it's connected to KPI. And I want to show you some simple PowerPoint presentation that compare implicit measures and explicit measures. So Shift F5, and those should be okay. So you should see implicit measures that easy to create. We see, so I think you saw that. But in this situation, we can easily create redundant, unnecessary measure by changing summarization options. We create new measures, and explicit measures are in most cases difficult to create, but implicit measures, we cannot change default number formatting. With explicit measures, we can. In implicit measures, we cannot change default name or function used. And explicit measures give us those options. And implicit measures, they are unavailable in some options. For example, KPIs, measure management, and so on. And explicit measures are available for these options. And the last small minus, it's sometimes harder to use implicit measures in other measures, but it's possible. And with explicit measures, it's not a problem. The problem is mostly because those implicit measures names are very long. So there sometimes will be problem with those long names. It will be harsh to it can be really hard to understand which implicit measure we're actually using. And I should show you before some summarization between normal pivot tables and power pivot tables. So normal pivot tables have calculated fields and items, but power pivot no calculated fields and items, because power pivot has measures instead. Normal pivot tables don't have measures. Only when we connect pivot table to power pivot, we can use measures, and it's really important. In normal pivot table, only one table range. Power pivot, we are using one table, but we can see that we can use more tables, but there should be a relation between those tables, and there is some additional summarization distinct count, and it's not available for normal pivot table. But when we add data set to most cases table to data model, and we don't even have to go to power pivot, we should have additional summarization distinct count. And there is one option including filters that isn't available for normal pivot tables, but is available for power pivot tables. And but where is this? Yeah. And I created this presentation. I will try to put it on the chat. And you should download this presentation as a Power PDF file. So those most important points about pivot tables and measures should be available for you. Okay, so let's get back to Excel, and we have Power Pivot created, the second pivot table created, and now we can create KPI for this. And if you are working with me, use KPI option from Power Pivot tab, and I will try if this time Power Pivot will allow me to create KPIs from here. So I want to create my KPI based on planned measure. So I just select this measure on the Home tab, go to Create KPI commands. But sometimes this option doesn't work for me. So I choose all option, press OK, and none KPI creates. So in most cases, I will use KPI from Power Pivot tab, not from Power Pivot editor, because sometimes these options won't work for me, and I'm not sure why. And I tested a few ways, and I'm not sure what's the key difference between those tests. But I will try this once again, because I tried this thing more in the morning, and it was working. So let's hope it will work also in the evening. So home tab, plant measure is selected, and then we can go create KPI, and we will see the same window, but it should be plant measure should be already selected, and we cannot change it here because it's gray out. So plant, and this time we want to calculate our KPI based on comparison to another measure. So it should be obvious that we want to compare our planned cost to actual cost. And this time the best colors scheme is the green one in the middle. So if our planned costs are equal to actual costs, our planning is the best. Bullseye. We hit the bullseye, but it almost never happens. So we should use some threshold. So let's say we go with 10% in each direction. So when our actual costs are between 90%, 110% of planned costs, we are good at planning. But when we go more, another 10%, so 80% and 120%, we are just okay with planning. But when we go even farther on the left, on the right, we are bad at planning, and it's very important in those calculations, those KPIs. And of course, our threshold don't have to be precise difference. So I can write here, for example, 82%, and will be okay. But let's leave it for 80% for now. And I will also change icons to the dataset I like the most. And it's all. And this, just choose measure, then the way we want to compare to target our measure. So when comparing to another measure, the target is 100%. So the planning is like the cost planning is the best here, because when we plan and our planned cost and actual costs are equal, the same, that is our target, and we can press OK. And KPI didn't work for me, and I have to create it once again, but this time I will create it faster and from PowerPivot table. So if KPI was created, I should see here traffic lights. I don't see any traffic lights, so I go to Excel, PowerPivot, and go to KPIs, new KPI, and I can choose planned value, and we can see that here I can only choose one of two measures, because KPI or measure can be connected to only one KPI. So our first measure is already connected to KPIs. So here we can choose only one of those two. So this time planned, and I want to connect to actual. So we can compare our KPI to, so let's drag it once again. I can compare my planned measure to percent cost, but it won't make sense, but here I can choose it. Okay, but actually I want to compare to actual. Once again, target, the green one in the middle, and just write proper values, and those values are in percent, but we don't write percentage sign. This percentage sign is forced on us in here. So let's, when I drag our slider a bit from the right and left, we can see where is good planning, where is okay, so pink is okay, and where is bad planning. And now when I press OK, the KPI was created, and once again we can see only numbers, but when we uncheck and check our status column field, it should we should see icons. And once again, let's change planned status name to KPI, and once again I like to have our data centers. So let's go to home tab and alignment, change to center, and we can see where our planning was good, where was okay, and where was bad. And this data set has curious situation, interesting for me at least, because for butterfly factory, our planning in each department are bad or just okay, but in total, our total planning for butterfly factory is good. Why? Because our planning was under pressure. So some cases our plan cost was lower than actual cost, and sometimes were bigger than our actual cost. And those difference sum to near perfect sum. So those errors negates itself, and our sum for butterfly factory was as a good planning. And we can now see this. And this is all I prepare for today. Just some short KPIs and introduction to PowerPivot. And if you like to challenge yourself with KPIs and PowerPivot, you can try to create your own KPIs based on challenge sheet, and our table is T pressure, blood pressure, and based on dates and pressure values, we want to create KPIs that will show us if our pressure, blood pressure is good, okay, or we should check with a doctor if something wrong with us, if we don't need some medical attention. But it's of course only as a challenge, as a homework, but the challenge seems nicer, especially if you know pivot tables. Try to create weekly summarization, not monthly, but weekly summarization. Okay, and put link to this file with challenge, of course. And this all for today from me. I just say one more. If you want to try to check my Excel book in English, the one right as a dialog, check and the link and in the file. I click this link, I think, yeah, and we show, and let's we show, yeah. I think don't be upset at me. Now I will show you that we have dialogue. So we have let's say two heroes of our book about Excel: the teacher and the one want to learn more about Excel. Okay. So Alan, do you want to say something more, or do anyone have a question at the end of our meeting?
Trying to unmute myself there. That took a few clicks. No, not really. Thank you, Adam, for your time. I guess if anybody wants to ask any questions or talk to Adam, thank Adam, and then feel free.
One more thing, eventually, if someone want to ask my question, can I write my email here?
Yeah.
So I will write my email and I will use the Polish domain because most cases I'm on this mail. Thanks, Katrin, that you like my presentation. I'm really glad that I inspire someone to try PowerPivot because it's not really easy tool. Power Query is much simpler. I think you should start, if you know Excel, you should go to Power Query, and then you should decide if you need more automating your tasks, so go to VBA, or you want to more like data. That's access and something like you need to connect between many tables, and that's more important. Okay. Yeah. So I will turn off my mic and I will turn.
Oh, buddy. Nice. Right.
Thank you, Adam.
Dziękuję.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, look at you with the MVP cup. I just saw that.
Yeah, I like it.
Thank you, Adam.
My tea is all still hot.
Thank you, Adam. Your presentation was awesome, as well as PowerPivot.
Thank you, Marina.
Excellent.
I'm glad that some of my viewers from Polish also managed to attend this meeting.
Good. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, lots of comments. I know you can see them, Adam, in the chat, which is good. Okay. Shouldn't be a problem, Charles. I'm not sure why you're experiencing that.
I know sometimes the files that you download from internet, if there aren't in the trust folders for Excel, they will show some messages, alerts. I'm not remember exactly where those options are, because those are protected in some option really deep, hide really deeply, and I don't remember. Oh, yeah, trust settings, those ones.
Oakley's mentioned about going into the file properties too. I'm sure if it's in there like a trusted location, if you move it to a trusted location. I don't know, they keep changing this security stuff. The MBA courses are fun nowadays. Let us know if you have any problems, Charles. We can probably attach it actually, can't we? You attached it earlier, Adam.
So I put a file from. Do you see my file from? Because I don't see on my other account. So I'm not sure. No, my file. I changed something. I changed my settings where I send my messages. So once again, let's try to all. Yeah, already to all. Yeah, I send just one person.
See if you have more luck with that, Charles. Claudia. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your comments as always, attending and for your nice comments. It's always good to support the speaker. You know, great presentation, great content. Obviously, as Adam said at the start, it's not his mother tongue, as we say. So yeah, it's a bit different coming in somewhere like this and presenting. It means more. Right. Cool. Right. Shall I turn off this YouTube stream? Are people waiting for me to turn off YouTube so they can come on camera and talk? I'm shutting down the YouTube stream, team.